Hello and welcome to the next episode of Cylinder Radio. I'm your host, Will Reusch, educator in Los Angeles, trying to bring viewpoint diversity to the mainstream. Today, I have a return guest, a friend of mine that we've been in communication for years, and we align on a whole bunch of different things. But then there's also areas where we disagree, and I thought that this would be a great opportunity for us to talk about the areas that we disagree on something fairly big, but also just to model civil discourse and to disagree better. So my guest is a writer, musician, photographer. He is the senior writer for FIRE, which is the Foundation for Individual Rights and not individual rights and education anymore. It's individual rights
Expression.
and expression. I'm sorry. Okay. And also he's the
Mhm.
board president of the Foundation for Against Intolerance and Racism, or FAIR, both organizations that are doing really excellent things. So my guest is Angel Eduardo. Angel, I'm so glad to be able to jump on this with you. When it comes to a lot of like the neo-racism and the whatever wokeness out there,
Mhm.
I think that you and I have a very similar approach with trying to use, empathy and understanding and not just, dunk on people that think differently and stuff. So when it
Right.
comes to the topic of faith, you and I are on kind of opposite ends, and we've been talking
Mm,
about doing this for a while. It's like, you're not supposed to talk about religion and politics, but I disagree with that. I think that you should be talking about this stuff. It's just how you do things really matters, and that's something that I think you're really excellent at. So,
no, thank you.
thank you so much for being here, man. Thank you.
Oh, my
I don't
pleasure,
know.
man.
Yeah.
I love
So
talking to you, and I love talking about this tough stuff. It's actually fun. So,
yeah, it is for me too. It is for me too, because I think
yeah.
my approach is probably similar to yours. It's like I'm just trying to understand why you think what you think. Like
Hmm.
not as much judgment. It's just like help me understand. And that's the way I've been with a lot of like the critical social justice stuff too. It's just like I
Sure.
don't understand how you can support this stuff, but help me get it. I just saw the Matt Walsh
Yeah.
movie, and it just like brought up all these same questions.
Oh
So
boy, I bet.
yeah, it was interesting. But just to get into like the faith kind of topic, can you bring me in a little bit on like what's your background? Like how were you raised, and then how did you kind of arrive at where you are now, and where is it that you are now? Because I don't even know the details of that.
Yeah, sure, sure. So let's see. Well, my parents are from the Dominican Republic, so it's very much Latin American culture is very much steeped in Catholicism for the most part. It's Catholicism, but Christianity in general. So, a lot of the customs and cultural things are interwoven with it. So even people who aren't necessarily religious or who don't go to church very often are still going to do the baptism stuff. They're still going to kind of do the Three Kings Day and stuff like that, right? So I'm somewhere in between in terms of how I was raised. I went to Catholic school for 2 years. I did 2 years, I like to say. Um, and would go to church kind of sporadically, not every single week, but like Easter was like a 100% that was going to happen, and yeah, stuff like that. My grandparents are very religious. They go every week, and that's like they read the Bible every night and all that kind of stuff. With my parents, it was a little bit different. My father was straight up atheist, but never said a word about any of it to any of us.
Huh.
Uh, so so he's kind of not part of the equation in terms of that because he never tried to influence and he never argued and he never said anything. So she just kind of went with my mom, and he would even go to church on Easter and stuff like that. So he would go with us. And my mom, in retrospect, I would say it was more of like a cultural thing and also a kind of familial duty thing.
Yeah.
She felt like that was her responsibility was to take us to church and to do that kind of stuff. But she wasn't like a regular Bible reader or anything like that, right? She
Yeah.
wasn't pious in that way. But the things you say all the time, gracias a Dios, thanks to God, all that kind of stuff. Si Dios quiere, God willing, all that kind of stuff is just part of the lexicon. It's part of the culture.
Yeah.
So it's a little wonky, right? But she she put me in Catholic school when I lived in New York City, first and second grade. Then we moved into the suburbs in New Jersey, and I was very happy to not have to go to Catholic school. I was going to public school there. But I was then taken to catechism or CCD, right?
Mm-hmm.
So once a week, I had to go over to a church nearby and take class after school.
Like seventh grade
So
or something like that.
it was from third grade up
Oh,
until about seventh grade
okay.
when, so I did my first communion because I was in Catholic school during that time, second grade. And then when we moved to New Jersey, it was catechism. I would go. We didn't do the Sunday school thing. It was just on Tuesdays after school from like 3:30 to 4:30 or something like that. And I did not enjoy that. I'll get to my
Why?
attitudes
Why?
about it.
What was
I'll
it
get to
that
my
you
attitudes
didn't?
about it.
What
Yeah,
was
yeah.
it
I'll get to
specifically
that
that
in a
you didn't
second.
enjoy?
Um, but let me just wrap that bit up.
Okay.
Yeah, so yeah, she did her due diligence and just kind of pushed me to do those things, and my siblings as well. I'm the eldest of four. So my attitude towards it was another thing, right? I kind of always hated the Catholic school uniform. I would trash it kind of on purpose, running around on the street, just scuffing it up, making it dirty, kind of wishing that it would be so messed up that I wouldn't have to wear it anymore.
Yeah.
And I just there was this interesting tension within me where I really, really wanted to follow the rules. I really, really believed the things that I was told, right? About you got to pray, you got to be good, God is watching you, et cetera, et cetera. All that stuff, I believed it 100%. And I wanted to be good and I wanted to follow the rules and
Yeah.
understand them and do everything I needed to do the right way. But I had that other part of me that was like, yeah, but you kind of aren't making sense right now. And you're going to have to answer some questions because I don't understand.
Yeah.
And then those questions were not answered to my satisfaction. So I would start to get frustrated and I would start to get kind of, skeptical. Like, okay, you don't know what you're talking about. So I'm going to have to talk to the next guy.
Yeah.
So I had that kind of attitude. So, and then Sundays were part of the weekend. And I also just didn't like going to school. So there was also the thing of you're taking more of my time from me by dragging me to church.
Yeah.
And even though it was an hour and some of my family members would literally spend all day there and I felt horrible for them, even though it was an hour, that was an hour of my time that was being taken from me. And I was already giving 5 days a week to school. So in my mind, it felt like an even greater affront, you know?
Yeah.
And so there's all that stuff kind of swirling around. And as I got older, I started pushing back a lot more logically because I started to think like, well, hold on a second, but this doesn't make any sense. And what about this? And what about that? And what about this? And what about that? And nobody had good answers for me, not the priests, not my CCD teacher, not my mom,
Yeah.
So then I start trying to read the stuff and trying to go like, okay, well, maybe you just don't know what you're talking about. Let me, because the stakes are really high, right? If you screw
Yeah.
this up, you're going to end up somewhere you don't want to end up. Right. So I'm 7 years old, 8 years old, and I'm like, this is a big deal. Like these are the things you really need to get right. So let me make sure I'm getting them right. I want to be good. I want to make sure God likes me and whatnot. So, but that kind of led me down the path of like, okay, you don't know what you're talking about. I'm going to talk to the next guy. You don't know what you're talking about. I'm going to talk to the next guy until I got to the CCD when I'm in seventh grade, sixth grade. And I realized this is even crazier than I thought. Like nobody seems to know what they're talking about. Everybody seems confused. Everyone seems to just kind of be doing it because they're doing it. And I'm not satisfied by this. Like I want to understand what's actually going on here. And, then you get around that time, you're also just starting to rebel and you're also
Yeah.
starting to consume your own diet of media and entertainment and all kinds of stuff. So I start hearing music and I start seeing movies that start asking these questions and dealing with these questions, you know? And yeah, by seventh grade, I was out. I was like, okay,
Yeah.
church is definitely not for me. That's not my thing. I still believe in God and I still want to be a good person, but organized religion is clearly there's some hucksterism going on there, right? And I don't like that. And I want to
Yeah.
keep it pure, right? So that's the first phase. The next phase is me starting to try to self-educate and ask those questions and find the answers myself. But then you start seeing inconsistencies in the Bible and you go, okay, well, God obviously didn't write this. I give God way more credit than that, right? If so, so then I go, okay, so this was written by dudes, but maybe God inspired it. And then you go, well, okay, but how come if God inspired it, how come there's slavery and there's all kinds of horrible stuff in it? That's not anything that the creator of the universe should be cool with, right? So it was
Mhm.
clearly just dudes. But there's this higher power that I still believe in and that I connect with. And I just think that religions are attempts to try to connect with that higher power and then hustlers and con men use that and use people's faith and use people's real desire to be good in a way that exploits them and all that kind of stuff. So I'm done with all of that, but I still believe in that thing. But then the more I thought about it, the more I was like, well, what am I holding on to? What's left? And there wasn't much at all.
Hmm.
And so I realized, okay, well, I actually have no idea if there's a higher power or not. I certainly don't believe in the one that was taught to me. I don't believe that one, there's no reason for me to believe that one is real. And then I realized, well, what about all the other religions? Like, I only thought my religion was true because I was born into it, and that's what people told me. If I was born in India, I would think something completely different. If
Yeah.
I was born in Iran, I would think something totally different. Like it seemed to be a roll of the dice. And then I realized, okay, well, I really have no idea. And so that's when I realized, okay, well, I'm an atheist because I don't actively believe in a God, but uh, yeah, the question of whether there actually is one or not is a question where I can only say I don't know.
Would you categorize
Um,
yourself more as like agnostic or atheist?
well, that's the thing is that for me, those two terms are answers to different questions, right?
Okay.
Because gnosis means knowledge. If you're agnostic, you have no knowledge. But atheism is about belief. So I don't believe in a God, so I'm an atheist. If you ask me whether I know there's a God or not, I would say I don't know. And so that
Right.
makes me an agnostic.
Okay.
And so people kind of put agnostic as like an in between, like
Yeah.
theism, atheism, and then agnosticism is in the middle. But uh, definitionally, that doesn't make sense. They're two different questions.
Or what I get a lot from people who categorize themselves as agnostic is like, I believe in a higher power. I just don't know what that is or what that looks like or how it manifests. But the
Right.
belief that there is more to consciousness and reality than what we see, what we can weigh and measure and things along those
Yeah.
lines. Would
Sure.
you
I,
would
I
you
mean,
agree with
I
that? Yeah.
I would call that like deism or something. Like if you think there's a higher power of some kind, but you can't articulate what it is, that's probably deism or theism. I don't know. Um, and yeah, I guess it depends on what you mean by a higher power, right? Like, um, is there are there forces beyond us? Is there a higher power in the sense of things that are greater than us, more powerful than us, etc.? Yeah. I mean, we're surrounded by it. The universe is a higher power, right? The laws of physics are a higher power, if you want to look at it that way. But if we're talking about like a sentient entity, then you're getting more specific, and then you would need evidence to back that claim up. And I don't have any. So
Yeah,
that's where I'm at.
thank you for sharing that because it makes sense, like your background, knowing what I
Hmm.
know about you. And I'm built a similar way of like, if you can't answer my questions, then I'm not buying into what you're selling.
Right.
What would like, yeah, that makes perfect sense. I mean, I came to faith later in life through asking those questions, and I hadn't gotten answers when I was younger either. But then as I dove
Hmm.
deeper into reading atheist books, Dawkins and Sam Harris a lot and stuff like that,
Sure.
it still left me like, there's still something more. And then when I leaned into hearing like Jordan Peterson talking about, the psychological lens of the Bible, and then I started reading apologetics books that started to answer some of the questions that I had. What were some like were your questions like, because you were in sixth grade, was it like the why do bad things happen to good people? And they just were like, well, I don't know God's ways. Was it stuff like that?
That's a huge one for
Yeah.
sure. The problem of suffering, the problem of, uh, yeah, bad things happening to good people, right?
Hmm.
Like, I just couldn't help but feel like if if I was watching my child suffering from something
Yeah.
and I just did nothing and I said, well, I got to let him because it's free will. Like that sounds like I'm shirking my responsibility as a parent,
Yeah.
right? And we're not talking about stuff where it's like, they fall down, they pick themselves back up. It's like, no, they're suffering from some crazy disease. It's not their fault. Or like their house is on fire and crumbling, and I could help, but I'm just leaving them there. It's that kind of thing where I was just like, that seems profoundly just wrong. I have such a deep innate moral sense that that's wrong. And it's bizarre to me that the creator of the universe, the thing that created me and gave me this moral sense, doesn't see that, right? And then the answer was, well, his ways are higher than ours. We just don't understand the grand plan. And I guess that worked for a bit, but then I'm like, but I don't know
Yeah.
what kind of plan should or would include like babies being born, dying already, suffering for 10 minutes, and then just being gone. Like, what is the point of that?
Right.
Right. So I just had too many of those questions, but also just logical ones. Like it starts with the Bible. It starts with, wait a minute, Noah was like 400 years old. Like,
Right.
are they measuring things the same way as we did? Like, and then you start looking into the history of this stuff, and it's like, oh, this is a translation of a translation of a translation. Lots of stuff gets mixed up, right? And we're talking about three different languages. We're talking about the fact that Jesus and his disciples were almost certainly illiterate. They never wrote anything down. The first gospels were written 100 years after the last guy died, if not longer. So they actually, and then, yeah, the gospels weren't even written by the people they're attributed to, all that kind of stuff. Like that's stuff that we know because we've got documented evidence about, like, well, this is the earliest we have of this. And we know that everyone back then was illiterate. So this passed down through word of mouth and until it was written down in Greek,
Mhm.
and it's like, okay, well, that's a long time. So a lot of
Yeah.
stuff can be missed and messed up there. So it's stuff like that. It's logical stuff to start, but then also the deeper philosophical stuff of fundamentally something is off here, you know? Um, and I guess after those initial teenage years where I guess you're content enough to just be angry at God and say like, yeah, well, God sucks, right? Then I think like, no, I give the creator of the universe way more credit than this.
Yeah.
So there must be something else going on. It must be that I have it all wrong and I just don't know anything, right?
Yeah. So the way that I want to share the way that I kind of view things and get your take on it. So the two things that I want to
Hmm.
just one is like the bad things happen to good people. I think about like the call when Magic Johnson got the call, like you've got the HIV, right? That's got to be a terrible. Sorry, I make light of it, but
Yeah.
like that's got to be a terrible phone call. Obviously,
Well,
that
he's
wouldn't be.
okay. So,
Yeah, well, that's kind of my point. Is like he got the
uh,
call, which was when he got the call, it was essentially a death sentence. But because he had so many resources and a big name and everything like that, he was
yeah.
able to be instrumental in bringing about the where HIV and AIDS is now, which is like I saw Greg
Hmm.
Louganis at like a fundraising event, and he looked phenomenal. He looked so good. He was like in his 50s. He was like ripped and like
Yeah.
like no wrinkles or anything like that. It's like, and he said he's like I'm not going to die from HIV, and like I wonder, or like the musical Hamilton, which is really good. Eliza Hamilton lost her son and her husband at a young age, but then she used that pain to create the first privately funded orphanage. Like, we go through a terrible breakup when we're younger. I went through, a hard breakup, and it's like at the time it was like this is terrible, but thank God that happened because my children wouldn't even exist right now. Like, is there a
Hmm.
way? And you could take the extreme of like a child being born with all kinds of deformities and then dying in a young age and excruciating pain. Like that's extreme. But like at what point would be like the line of this has some good to it and then get to like the most extreme of like the child being born. It's like, okay, well, there's no good to be extracted from that. Is it possible that it's similar to the ones that are further down on that scale that we just don't have a way to understand?
Sure, but you would have to plead ignorance in terms of the why, right? And whether there
Yeah,
is any
you
kind
do.
of puppeteer that is handling that whole situation, right? So that's the first thing. The first thing is you would have to say, I can come up with reasons, right? I can come up with a situation where, I mean, it's like that proverb, right? Like, The farmer's son breaks his leg on a
Yeah,
horse,
maybe.
but then he doesn't get drafted, and then yeah, and it just keeps going like,
I
oh,
love
oh,
that.
this is good fortune. I don't know, maybe not, and then it just keeps going, right? But in my view, the point of that proverb is that you never really know, and you can just do the math at the end
Yeah.
and get whatever you feel like, right? You can kind of weigh it and be like, yeah, it was more bad than good, or it was more good than bad. It just depends where you're going to plant the flag. In my view, the point of that proverb is that life just keeps going on, and that there is no real final, in the end, it all worked out because there is no end, right? Everything keeps going. Everything is just on a continuum. So there's that. But if you're gonna do that, if you're gonna say, well,
I'll get the answers at the end when I pass
yeah,
away or something.
if you're gonna do that, if you say, it took Magic Johnson getting AIDS for all this AIDS research to happen, you first of all, if you're gonna do the thing of it's part of God, that means it's part of God's plan, and it's all gonna work out. You would have to plead ignorance as to what God's plan is, which means that
Yeah.
preaching about it's acting like is already off the table.
Well, the details of it, right? Like the
Yeah.
details of, I mean, you could say like his plan is a loving one, but like how
Hmm.
that plays out, you'd have to be ignorant about because we don't have a God that you would fully
Well,
understand.
right, but if for that same reason, you can't quite say that his plan is a loving one. You don't know if it is, right? It might just be working out for you right now, and who knows? It might be terrible, right?
No, but
We
that's the
don't know.
faith. I mean, like if like people
Right.
like if you're reading the Bible and you're following the faith, then it's just constantly that it's a
Hmm.
loving plan, constantly it's a loving plan. And I know people in the church
Right.
who've had those same things, a child dying at 2 years old or something along those lines, and they're just like, this
Hmm.
is a loving plan, and they come through that with this like you can call it a delusion, but it does help them to find joy in tremendous suffering.
Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah.
And
That
even if
that's
that is
definitely
a
true.
delusion, it's a delusion that might be I'll take that delusion going through a hardship.
Well, yeah, so that's obviously true that people have found comfort in all that kind of stuff, but they're still making the decision to believe something without evidence. And if that's what they want to do, then that they're free to do it. I'm not going to go shaking people and saying there's no evidence for this. How dare you, right? Like you're suffering, and I get why people default to this stuff. But you have to recognize that that's what you're doing. You have to recognize that what you're doing is fundamentally irrational. You're choosing to believe something when it's just as likely that it could be something else because it makes you feel better or whatever. And that's fine, but as long as you acknowledge that that's what you're doing, right?
Yeah.
Or you
Yeah.
can
Would
go the
you?
other way. You can go the other way and just say, well, it's fundamentally mysterious to me. I don't know if there's anything puppeteering this or if there's a point to any of it. But what I can do right now is do the best I can to deal with it in a way that's healthy, in a way that's productive, and that helps me move about in the world, understanding that there are things outside of my control and that I can only do the best with what I've got. Right? It seems like
Yeah.
you can kind of get the same outcome without taking on any of the unfounded claims, right?
Would
That's
you
the thing.
say, yeah, would you say there's evidence though of like after you die that it just like, fade to black, like nothing? Like there's no evidence for that either, right? So would it come down to the point where it's like the evidence, there's really no, that's what makes it faith is like there's equal ambiguity on both sides. So you kind of choose which one you want to
Uh,
believe.
yes, except that one is a negative claim and the other is a positive claim, right? So
Mm,
one is a claim that says these are the things that happen after you die,
mm.
right? And if the other claim was no, 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 the thing that happens after you die is nothing, then those claims would be equal because they're both making positive claims based on no knowledge about what happens after we die, right? But one claim is saying these are the things that happen. You go to this place, you talk to this guy, et cetera, et cetera. And the other claim is you have no idea about that. You have no evidence to support that. And I have no evidence to support it either. And I have no evidence to support any other thing. So it's just a question mark.
So
That's
there
where I'm
isn't
at.
like a belief. Like if I would say, like,
No,
what do
right.
you think happens? It's just an I don't know.
I would say I have no idea.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think most honest atheists would say that, right? Like the thing about atheism is that it's not a belief. It has no content of its own. It is
Yeah.
literally just the absence of a belief in a supernatural deity. That's it. So there are atheists who are numerologists. There are atheists who believe in astrology, right? Like it's all over the place because there are no tenets. There's nothing you need to believe to be an atheist.
Yeah.
It only requires that you not believe one single premise, which is that there is some kind of God-like being. And if you don't believe that, you become an atheist automatically.
Did you hear Jordan Peterson said something? He said if you're unintelligent, you should probably be religious. And well, what I got from that, I mean, there's obviously really smart people that are religious too, but
Sure.
like, but what I got from that and is if like you're okay with having question marks, you're okay with not having answers, like Sam Harris, Peter Boghossian, like they're okay just being like, I don't know. I don't know.
Hmm.
And I think that for a lot of people, that's too unsettling to get through the world. So they're gonna have to come up with some sort of operating
Hmm.
system to answer these big questions. Otherwise, maybe the just like they don't have this analytical brain in the same way. So they're looking for some sort of answers. And that could be
Hmm.
through like a traditional religion, it could be through Christianity or something like that. But it could also be through, these pseudo religions of crystals and I don't know, all kind of ayahuasca trips
Right.
and or like wokeness. I mean, it's all kind of manifests in a similar way of like giving you answers. And it seems like the
Hmm.
people who are more in the intellectual sphere of atheism, which like atheists are divided up. There's like super ignorant, unintelligent atheists, and then super
Hmm.
intelligent, like science-minded atheists, and then same thing with even like in Christianity, there's really brilliant
Yeah.
Christians, and then there's really like simplistic, just like go for like the lowest common denominator type of thinking, you know?
Sure. Sure. Look, we are hardwired to seek out patterns and to ask the question why, because we need stories. We're story-based creatures. That's what we want, right?
Yeah.
So I completely understand how unsettling it is to ask the question, okay, but why are we here? What's the point of all of this? Because that's a natural question to have, and to not have an answer to that.
Do you think there is an
But
answer?
uh,
Like
I
what's
don't
this
know,
existence
because
all about? Why consciousness?
I don't. Well, maybe, but it would kind of presume that there is something outside of it that can justify it in that way, right? Because like if you say like, well, what's the point of this pile of stuff that's on my plate, right?
Yeah.
It's like, well, that's called food, and we eat it so that we can continue to live. That's the why of this.
Yeah, yeah.
That's the reason we make food. That's the reason we eat it. But like, in order for the universe to have a purpose, there must be something outside of it to give it that purpose, right? And we have just no way of knowing if that's the case. So there's that on the cosmic level. For me, on a personal level, the answer to the question, what is the meaning of life? Like that's like the $10 trillion question
Yeah,
that
it's a
is
little
like
trite,
so
but yeah, it's
elusive to answer,
important. Yeah.
right? Like, what's the meaning of life? Easiest question in the world for me to answer. What's the meaning of life? The meaning of life is to be conscious and to just experience it, right? Like, why are we here? We're here to experience this thing, right? Think about billions and billions and billions of people who have never lived and will never live
Yeah.
because, we are the sperm that made it, right? We're here and they're not. That's amazing. And we're capable of consciousness. We're capable of being aware. And that's amazing in and of itself. It doesn't need to have been given to us by a thing that then says this is why this matters. It matters intrinsically because it's just this phenomenon that emerges and it's incredible. So
Yeah.
for me, it's like, the Carl Sagan thing of we're a way for the cosmos to know itself. I feel that really deeply. Like if I take a moment and pause and just look around and I realize everything I do is bizarre and amazing, right? Like eating is weird. We take this stuff and we shove it into our mouths and we chew it up into like a paste and we swallow it and then it gives us nutrients and then we have energy and we can move around and do other stuff. It's weird. The whole thing is bizarre
Yeah.
if you stop and look at it, right? But it's amazing. What like
Yeah.
all of this could have just as easily not been at all, right? And
And
that's
yet it
amazing
is.
enough.
And yet it is.
Right.
And so, that's why the why is there. I want to come back to that, but I just want to get your thoughts
Yeah.
on like the way I view Bible stories. And I've talked to different pastors and stuff, and some of them, interpret these more literally.
Hmm.
Like you're on board with the idea that you're a writer, like we understand the world through narrative.
Yeah.
Our John Haidt, our brains are a story processor, not a logic processor. So the
Yeah.
way that I see it
100%.
is, what's that?
100%. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So the way that I see it is like, okay, so once we, eat from the fruit, or maybe it's psilocybin mushrooms, I don't know. But once we got consciousness, right? It's like, oh my gosh, I'm naked. That's the way the story goes. It's like, I'm naked. Who told you you're
Right.
naked? It was like, oh, I had this fruit. And like all of a sudden, at some point in the evolutionary chain, we got consciousness in a way that other animals don't, as far
Hmm.
as we know. So once we can decide right or wrong, are you like a moral relativist, or do you believe?
No, I think there's an objective morality.
Okay. So like once there is like an objective, like right or wrong,
Hmm.
then it's like, how do I know what's right? Because you can't just go with your gut instincts, that cliche of like, everywhere Adolf, I asked my class and I'm like, who's definitely in hell if there's a hell? Adolf Hitler. Okay. Do you think he knew that he was bad? Like really, like everywhere you went, if you're just following your heart, everywhere you went, it was people smiling at you and saying how great you are. And it's just like that kind of like
Right.
obsequious stuff coming at you everywhere. Celebrities get the same thing. Like your heart, I mean, it says in the Bible a lot, your heart is so, deceiving. So what I think of these stories as is like, it's like a fairy tale. Like I want to teach my kids about, like grit and sticking to it and everything like that. So I read them Tortoise and the Hare. It's like, let me break down these
Hmm.
stories that will teach you. So like I open up my computer. I'm not a computer person. So I open it up and I have a Mac. So it has like little icons, and the one with the camera on it, my dumb brain goes, oh, that's the camera. Right. So if I just looked at the
Hmm.
code, I'd be lost. So the code of what reality is, God's like, okay, well, I can't just show you the code. You're not going to understand, the complexity of my reality, why I kill a baby, or why I shouldn't say kill a baby, but like why I let a baby die, or whatever it might be.
Hmm.
So I'm going to give you these stories, and that's going to dumb it down for your little, tiny little minuscule brains. It's like, how do I explain Wi-Fi to a squirrel? Like I'd have to break it down and be like, so there's this acorn. You know what I mean? Like I have to. So I think about
Yeah.
Bible stories like that. Like it's a way for us to understand something that's really complex. And you take them as like
Hmm.
fundamentalists, like this is word for word the way it goes. I think that it's missing the point. Like the turtle didn't actually race the rabbit, but there is something
Right.
deeply true in that. And then
Hmm.
those stories will help guide you in like when you do have consciousness of like, well, okay, so if the meaning of life is to just experience it, can you do it right or do it wrong? I think that you can do it wrong. Like you could take an infant and throw them in boiling water. That's doing a consciousness wrong. So how do we
Hmm.
know right from wrong? Is it just written on your heart? Which the Bible does talk about that too. Or is it like,
Hmm.
do we need a guidebook? Do we need an instruction manual for how to be? And is that what like religions come from? And then last thing
Hmm.
is like, if that does come from like, this is the way to live. And if you do live this way, you will actually come out ahead in the end. Is that something that is essentially divine in the same way that a musician says, like, it just came to me. I don't know where the stairway to heaven or whatever
Yeah.
this is. Freebird just like came to me, like as if it's from above, which you hear all the
Hmm.
time when it comes to artists. So like
Yeah.
that's kind of the way that I see things. I'm curious on your thoughts.
I'm pretty much with you. It's just that God is not a necessary component in any of that, right? So the question of like, does it come, is morality written in our hearts or do we need a guidebook? I think it's both. I think it's written in our hearts and we need a guidebook because it's very difficult and our hearts are complicated and the
Yeah.
world is complicated. And we write these guidebooks, we write these stories for ourselves to help ourselves move forward with the things that we know somehow innately are better for us. So like I believe there's an objective morality, even though I do not believe that there's a God, right?
Okay.
And people often ask like, well, where does the morality come from then? How
Yeah.
is it objective? It's objective because what if you think about what morality is at bottom, what is morality? Morality is a strategy for flourishing. That's what it is, right? If you follow these rules, your life will be better and the lives of the people around you will be better, which also means your life will be better, right? If everyone follows these rules, things will be better. What does better mean? Better means we're flourishing. It means we're not suffering needlessly. That's what
Mhm.
it means. And that's all about conscious experience. So when I think of that, it's like, well, yeah, then there are reasons why it is just obvious that putting your hand on a hot stove is just going to be bad for you because we immediately recoil. We have that programming. And the reason we have that programming is because we're wired to try to flourish as much as possible, right? Now it gets complicated because we're complicated and interaction is complicated, but we're pro-social, we are collaborative, we are intelligent, and we have flourished this much this far because we are able to systematize our instincts and the things that we learn so that future generations can pick it up quicker than we did. And then they can run with it and pick up even more and refine what wasn't there before and make things better and keep going and just improving and improving and improving, which on balance is what human history has been. It's just stumbling our way forward, right?
Yeah.
This is the best time in human history to be alive, right? Just totally true, despite all the problems we have.
Right.
So there's that, right? I think that that's the baseline of morality is conscious experience and human flourishing. That's the point of it. So there doesn't need to be a point outside of it, right? So there's that. And then the stories that we create are to help us do that. And I think that if that's how you look at Bible stories, then you're looking at it in a much healthier way, right? Like I remember reading Genesis and the Adam and Eve story. And, as a writer who knows about form and,
Yeah.
all that kind of stuff that I learned, like it's a fable. It's 100% a fable. Like it's absurd to try to think of it logically, like literally, take it literally as literal history,
Yeah.
because when you do that, you realize none of it makes any sense, right? Like, well, why would God do that? Why would God put this tree there if He didn't want anybody to eat from it? And just to trick them into learning this lesson, and all that kind of stuff. And but if you look at it as a fable, you go, okay, well, what's the lesson that's trying to be taught here? And you can pull a bunch of stuff from it. And some of it maybe you agree with, some of it maybe you don't. I think that's great. And I would never, for example, despite being an atheist, I would never try to get rid of the Bible or stop people from reading it. I think it's important to read. And I think that there's a lot of wisdom you can draw from it. But there's a lot of wisdom you can draw from the Bhagavad Gita and the Quran and Superman comic books, right?
On
So,
the
like,
same level, you think?
on the same level,
Yeah.
on the same
Impressive.
level. Just because one is really, really old doesn't automatically make it better. There's plenty of stuff that can be improved on that old stuff, right? But so the reason why I love Superman, I love talking about Superman. I'm a huge
Nice.
Superman fan, and the one of the reasons I love bringing that up in this context is because think about this for a second. Superman as a character was created in the mid 1930s. We know who created him. We know how he was created. No one believes he's real unless you're like 2 years old, right?
Right.
Like no like functioning human being no thinks that he's a real person who flies around or that Metropolis is a real place or anything like that, right?
Yeah.
So that's all set aside. We don't even have to worry about that. So what do we have left? We have these stories that we know where they came from because it's people writing them and drawing them and acting in them or whatever. And we just get to love these stories and see what these stories are, and it inspires us and it teaches us stuff and we think about it. I grew up watching this stuff, these cartoons and these movies and reading these comic books and getting these moral lessons from this character that doesn't exist, never existed. No one's ever killed anybody over it, right?
Yeah.
Like it's completely devoid of all those problems, but I'm still getting the exact same benefit of here are some real moral teachings. Here's an example of somebody doing the right thing even when it's difficult. Here's an example of someone who behaves the way that if everyone behaved this way, the world would be a better place. All that kind of stuff, right? So
Yeah.
what that does for me is show that the important bit is the stories themselves and the fact that Superman is an avatar for the morality that we already have, right? Because it's not like the character is moral on the page by himself. We have to write that in. We have to decide, oh, how would Superman deal with this situation? What would he do based on his ethics? And we have to figure it out for ourselves and then write it and have the character do that. So it means that he's a reflection of the morality we already have, and we're using him as an avatar and as a reminder for when we are in our worst moments.
Yeah.
We can look to that and say, ah, yes, that's the way. Remember that? That's the way. And I'll give you a quick example.
Okay.
When I was a kid, there was a time when I was in Toys R Us, and I really, really wanted this toy, but I wasn't going to get it. It's a long story, but I wasn't going to get it. And I really, really wanted it, but I wasn't going to get it. So what am I going to do? Well, the two options are you're just going to walk away without it or put it in your pocket. So I
Nice.
put it in my pocket, right? I ripped it out of the packaging and I put it in my pocket. I shoved it in my pocket. And even though my heart was racing and whatever. And of course, I'm like 8 years old or something like that. I knew it was wrong.
Yeah.
I already knew the lesson, like, don't steal. You're not supposed to do that. But I was doing it anyway because that desire overwhelmed the knowledge, right? I could taste the summer air outside. That's how close I was
Uh-oh.
to getting out.
You feel the hand
In,
on your shoulder?
no.
Oh.
In that moment, with those double doors opening, I had an image in my mind of Christopher Reeve as Superman in the sky. And he just had this look of disappointment on his face, just looking at me and just going, and that shattered me. It
Interesting.
broke my heart into a million pieces. And I almost started crying. And I was like, I can't do it. And I ran back to the shelf and I put the toy back. And then I ran back to join my parents as we were walking out. I couldn't do it
Yeah.
because of that look of disappointment on his face. Now again, he's not real. That wasn't a vision from Superman, right? Like he's not real. And not even that, but
Right,
it
but the
was an
morality
actor.
element was real.
It was an actor who
Yeah.
played Superman,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
right?
Of course.
But but the feeling was real and that morality was real. So what was it? It was me finding a way to tell myself, you know what you're doing is wrong and that you shouldn't do it.
But
He's the
where,
mirror for
yeah.
that, you know?
Where did you
But
learn that? You learned it from the comic books, you learned it from your parents, you learned it from probably Catholic school, you kind of learned it from just society in
everybody,
general.
yeah.
What if you were raised in a culture that didn't have that element
Hmm.
then? Like that would then you wouldn't have had you weren't exposed to Christopher Reeve, then like then you wouldn't see that as moral, like that's
Right.
what I think people argue is like if you grow up in where it's okay to throw rocks at a woman for wearing a mini skirt or something like that, and
That's
that's
right.
everything, all the literature you read is saying that that's okay, then you'll
Yeah.
have a different moral compass. Then who are we to say that our morals are right and yours are wrong?
So yeah, I would say that that's correct, right? Like if I had never been taught those lessons, if that had never been instilled in me through Superman, through a million things, right? Because it's all over the place.
Hmm.
Don't
Yeah,
steal. That's a popular one, right?
yeah,
I wouldn't have learned it, and I certainly would have just done it because it's what I wanted, and I was satisfying that urge, right? So we have these primal urges that we learn how to sublimate because it's better.
yeah,
But we only can do that through teaching. That's why we need the stories, right? But when it comes to how can you then judge a culture that doesn't have it for like, how is our morality better? Well, I would do the math and I would say, well, who would you rather live in a society where you constantly have to look over your shoulder, worrying about getting bashed in the head or having all your stuff
yeah,
taken away, or a society where everyone just agrees, let's not do that so that we can all just sleep easy and not worry about it? I think basically everyone would say, well, yeah, if I could pick, I would pick the one where nobody steals anything. You know,
yeah. I
most
mean,
people would probably say that.
yeah, and along those same
And
lines, if you would say where would you want to live anywhere in the world, I am guessing that almost everyone who's like free thinking person would choose a country or a location that had a strong Christian foundation in it, right?
uh,
No.
yeah, they see that's the problem. The problem is that there's a lot smuggled in when you say a strong Christian foundation. Like we're
Mm.
thinking about don't steal, we're thinking about be kind, but there's a lot more to Christianity than just that. So I would say a strong moral foundation. that'd be great, right? And we the thing is that we can judge morality because again, it's a strategy for flourishing. So if you live in a place where it's okay to throw rocks at a woman for wearing a miniskirt, that's not the best strategy for flourishing, right? There's plenty of people who are not flourishing there, and you can see
Right.
that objectively. So when you look at it that way, it becomes clear that there's such a thing as right and wrong and better and worse when it comes to how humans should behave and what benefits them most, right? So there's plenty of it in Christianity, but there's plenty of it in other places. And Christianity and all the other religions have tons of stuff that is not conducive to flourishing and is not
Like what?
conducive
Give
to,
me an example that stands out to you.
well, well, it depends on what we're going to talk about, right? Because there's so many factions and things. But like if you're looking at the Bible, right? Like there's slavery and there's, ways that you treat women and all kinds of stuff like that.
So you're
That
talking about
is,
like Old Testament stuff.
yeah.
I mean, New
But
Testament
also
too, but
there's even New Testament stuff. But it just depends, right? It
Mhm.
depends. But I'm speaking generally. Like every religion, once it becomes coagulated into a dogma, you start getting a ton of stuff that's just not conducive to flourishing. And so where that leaves me is here's what I'm going to do. I have my internal moral compass and I'm going to use it to pick and choose the things that work from every belief system and every ideology. And I'm going to go, this seems like a good idea. This seems to work. I'm going to go with
because it
this.
aligns with a whole bunch of different.
Yeah, because it seems to function well for generally speaking. And I don't have to buy into the whole thing and I don't have to buy into the stuff that I think doesn't work or is bad. So, same thing with like wokeness, right? Like, racism is bad, 100% with
Right.
you, right? Like equality is good, 100% with you. This particular method for trying to achieve it, not a good idea. But that doesn't mean I'm going to abandon the equality is good, right? I'm going to keep that. I'm just going to move on past you and I'm going to find another way to try to make that work. So it's kind of like that. I think we should be intellectual nomads with respect to what are the best ideas. And I think anybody who settles on a particular ideology is almost cheating themselves out of all the benefits of all the other ones because no one's ever going to get it 100% right. You know what I mean?
Yeah, yeah. Just closing out the idea of story. I guess I think about if there's like all whether it's Star Wars or Harry Potter, all these whatever, like really it could be Superman, all these books really and movies kind of come down to this idea of good and evil, right and wrong, and then some sort
Mm-hmm.
of like I don't know, like person from a modest background who comes up and is a savior. It's kind of it kind of follows like this same Joseph Campbell's, hero's journey, kind of follows this like same thing, this like same kind of
Mm-hmm.
structure. And the structure goes back to, I mean, the stories of the Bible. Like I think about the passion story as, like Jesus's story as like I don't know, it seems like a perfect story. Like in just in so many ways about like the way that he was, came to this world, the way he lived his life, being like sinless, like
Mm-hmm.
just like doing all good. And then the way he's just massively betrayed, when they say like, why do bad things happen to good people? It's like, well, the worst happened to the best person in this story. So that's something. So that seems to be in the structure here. So
Mm-hmm.
Jesus, going through, getting murdered, getting killed and tortured and ridiculed and spat on, betrayed by his friends, betrayed by his people, killed in front of his mom, like all of this kind of stuff happening all at once. And then
Mm-hmm.
coming through that to overcome death, which would be, I think, one of the biggest fears. It should be one of the biggest fears of someone who's conscious of like what happens when you're dead is like it gives you an answer to overcome that great fear. But when there's like you boil it down from all stories down to like the core story, like
Mm-hmm.
is that in some way divine in that it's like it's almost like music, it's like was it the cycle of fifths or something like that. It all kinds of like boils
Mm-hmm.
down to this like one basic story, and then this story actually has roots in history too. Like now it seems pretty unanimous that like Jesus of Nazareth was a real person. He was crucified, and then you know hundreds of people died to uphold the idea that he resurrected. Like that's
Mm-hmm.
true. Whether or not he's like God in human form is not something that's like provable. but
Right.
like that element that he was a real person. And so it's like, is the core perfect story, I guess my question is like the core perfect story of Jesus, his death and resurrection, is that the one that like spawned all of these other stories to some degree because it is fundamentally true? And then if that is has some connection clearly to like to the
Um,
real world and history, that is something that we can kind of like make sense of like saying that that is
uh,
deeper.
well, it's a good story,
Yeah.
and
I mean,
obviously you
would you
can get
say
a.
it's beyond a good story though? Would it be like one of the best stories, I guess is what I'm saying.
Uh,
Or is it just
well,
a story like
th
any other?
here's the thing I was gonna say is that if you start the clock at the year 0 AD, then yeah, maybe.
Mhm.
But you're discounting thousands of years of other stories that are similar to it. Ancient Egypt has a few that are quite similar. Anubis and Osiris and all these things. And I mean, it's not like they had a time machine, right? So, uh, what I think is happening, and then ancient Greece, and then there's also, in the East, you've got India with, thousands of stories that are much older and all that kind of stuff. So I think what you have there is something that is deeply human, something that comes from us because of the way the world is and the way that we are wired to respond to it. So I don't put any special emphasis on that particular story of Jesus because it's not that it's just another story like any other. I mean, it obviously resonates with a lot of people. There are also historical reasons why that's the dominant story, but uh, those other stories are just as profound, and a lot of them are you can almost like put them on a timeline together, and the beats are almost identical, right? Like it's just because there's
A
an
deep truth to it, right?
underlying what?
Isn't
Yeah,
that
well,
because there's
there's
like something deeply true about that story? There is something that deeply connects with us as human
yeah,
beings that it would be replicated over. Like movies kind
yeah,
of seem like the same thing. Joseph Campbell thing, like it just seems like the same thing over and over again because that is something deeply
yeah,
true.
yeah. Well, if we're talking about now as a context, now we're in the context where Christianity is like the dominant thing and it's going to influence everything everybody writes all the time. And we have Joseph Campbell who broke it down, and we have screenwriters who understand how story works, and they're going to use those forms and like archetypes and all those things because that's what works. And so it becomes a self-perpetuating kind of thing. But also, the answer to your question, though, is yes, there is an underlying thing that I think resonates deeply, which is why it continues to manifest in all these different ways. It's just that this particular way that it manifested is not any more special than all the other ways that it manifested. It's almost a historical accident that this is the one we're talking about right now.
Hmm.
There are a lot of things that happened to make this the one, apart from the fact that it's more true or anything like that, right? I mean, there was like literally there was conquest, there was all kinds of political stuff, right? Like that's another reason why we're talking about this story and not a different one, like not Mithra or something, right? There's a
Yeah,
lot that happened. But
right.
the story itself, if you look at it as a story and the underlying myth and the underlying kind of um, symbolism and all that kind of stuff. That's a deeply human thing that's been reverberating since humans could tell stories. That's just something that is part of who we are. So again, I think people are looking outside for an answer to why this resonates when really it's right here. Like the reason it resonates is because there's something inside of us that we feel deeply, and it's some kind of connection and communion with each other and with the universe around us that manifests itself in this thing. There's some kind of truth that we're trying to shape. We're trying to like kind of mold this clay into this thing. And these are the best attempts we've made at getting at that. Right. But that says nothing about how true it is, like literally historically true. Right. Like I believe Jesus was almost certainly a person that existed. Right. But almost certainly a lot of the things attributed to him, maybe he never said. And it's difficult to know. Right. But like, there's a lot going on there. And I think a lot of people who have the kind of desired endpoint, or the desired conclusion of saying that therefore this is true, this is the best thing to believe, and this is how I'm going to structure my life, they kind of fudge over a lot of that stuff that makes that conclusion dubious and complicated. And I don't really have that problem. I went through the very painful and difficult journey of letting all that stuff go, because I realized that I was only holding on to it because I really, really wanted to, and not because it made sense. And so now it's been long enough that I'm comfortable just saying I have no idea, but that's a beautiful story and I could pull stuff from it.
Yeah.
And this is a beautiful story too, and I can pull stuff from that. And I feel much freer to do that, and I feel like it benefits me more to
That's
do that. And I
that's what's
think,
so cool, and that's why I love having this conversation with you. Which I have like two more things I want to address because otherwise we could
yeah,
talk
yeah, please.
like literally ever, man. Like I,
No, I know.
I have gotten the exact kind of opposite. Like as I was kind of running from faith for a long time, which is like nonsense, kind of blah blah blah. As soon as I
Hmm.
turned around without evidence and said, "All right, I'm gonna buy into this," my life got better in so many quantifiable ways.
Hmm.
So that's just going to obviously reiterate them like, okay, this is the right path for me. You know,
Hmm.
like a lot of the issues that people have with Christianity is about the people and not about the word. Like I bulk a little bit when I'm saying I'm a Christian. And part of the reason is because I think of myself more as like a Jesus follower. Like I think about it like if I'm giving
Mm.
a book report or something like that, I hold up an example. This is a perfect paper. Okay. You're not going to get to that, but it's perfect. That's the bullseye. Um,
Hmm.
and a lot of people that have issues with Christianity, and I don't know if this was as much you, but like a lot of people have issues with like people within the church doing terrible things, or people who use Christianity to ridicule. And like I've been very critical of Matt Walsh because I think that
Yeah,
when he did that tweet about Dylan Mulvaney, calling him a deep fake
yeah,
human, disgusting, I was like, wait, you call yourself a
terrible.
Christian speaker? What would
Yeah.
Jesus, those bracelets, WWJD, right? Jesus would say, "Hey, Dylan, come over to my house for lunch. I want to get to know you. I want to hear who you are and pour into you, in
Hmm.
a Daryl Davis kind of way to steer you out of what I believe to be your sinful ways through loving relationship." And that is what Jesus, that's literally what he did when the Pharisees were like, "Why do you dine with prostitutes and tax collectors and sinners?" He's like, "It's the sick that need a doctor, not the healthy." So he immersed himself, or he was surrounding himself with all the dregs of society. And I don't see
Hmm.
that enough among like Christian intellectual or Christian like influencers, I should say. But
Yeah.
that doesn't take away from, that just makes me more critical of them, but not more critical of the teachings of Jesus in the Bible.
Hmm.
So like
Yeah.
are there teachings of Jesus, like things that he advocated for, that you think are bad when it's in like the text, or is it the way that it gets interpreted by human beings more?
I can tell you that for me, in my experience, it was not the people. That
Yeah.
was like, I didn't have like a horrible experience with a bunch of Christians who were horrible.
But you
And
recognize
that,
that is a
you know,
very big thing.
for sure. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Like I know many people who, they had horrible experiences, and that's part of the reason that they left the faith or whatever, right? But I didn't have that. Besides, just boredom.
Yeah.
My experience was never bad. It was just this doesn't make sense to me, and you don't seem to know what you claim to know. And the questions I'm asking you shouldn't be hard. I mean, I'm 7.
Right.
Like, how do you not know how to handle these questions? Like, these are very obvious things. Um, so yeah, for me, it's that. But the thing is too that I'm totally with you, right? Like, I had the exact same response to Matt Walsh,
Yeah.
and I have the exact same response to anyone who behaves that way, right? And uses their religion in that way. Um, which to me signals that there's a higher morality that isn't found within these systems. It is infused into those systems by the people who, so you know what I'm saying? Like, moral people are going to be moral anyway. Like, you're going to be a good dude whether you're Christian or not. You have that internal sense. You've found a structure that you've found works for you and that is benefiting you, and that's great. My contention would probably be that if you found a different one, it would work just as well. Maybe like superficially, there might be things about it that are less palatable or whatever. But the reason it would work anyway is because all you're doing is structuring the thing you already know. You've already got it in you. And you're just using this as a way to systematize it. But I can do the same thing. Like I can say, what would Superman do?
Yeah.
Same thing. Same answers, basically. And the system is the same. So I lose nothing, right? Like, what would Jesus do? What would Superman do? Same answers. But on one side, I don't have to believe anything on insufficient evidence. I don't have to argue with anybody about whether he's real or not. I don't have to do any of that extra stuff. I can just focus on the best way to move about in the world that is most conducive to my and everyone else's flourishing. So it just eliminates all that unnecessary stuff as far as I'm concerned. Now, I also understand that people need structure and they need community and they need all these things, and so do I. I'm not. I'm not free of those needs, right? But I get them in different places. I get them in different ways. I have communities based on other things, and I have a worldview that allows me to feel a sense of community no matter where I am or what I'm doing, right? So I have that belief based on all the evidence we have, right? Literally, all the evidence we have points us to this belief that every atom inside my body was born in the heart of a star billions of years ago. Same with you. And same with these computers we're using and the microphones and everything else. It's all atoms when you zoom all in. And all of it is just intermingling. And we are just this manifestation of the cosmos that is lucky enough to be conscious and turn around and kind of pay attention to itself. And we're having this amazing experience. So what that does is it connects me to literally everything and everyone. Everyone is my sibling. Everyone is connected to me on a deep fundamental level. And I love them because they're me and I'm them. And we are all riding this thing together, whether we like it or not, and whether it sucks or not at any given moment. We're all doing this together. So I see this incredible communion around me with that includes literally everybody. Matt Walsh and you, right?
Yeah.
Like it's the same.
Yeah.
Matt Walsh is my brother, right? Like
I know.
it's just what it is.
Same way. Yeah.
And I feel that deeply. And it's all based on things that we have concrete evidence for, and we don't have to take on faith. There's no reason to think of it in any kind of faith-based way, because it's just true. We're made of atoms, and all those atoms came from stars billions of years ago, and they make up everything around us and who we are. And we have this mysterious consciousness that we're all experiencing. Those are all facts. And
Do you see those as like
they're
other facts that, sorry to cut you off, but like, do you see those as I think about the changing science all the time though, with new technology and
mhm,
stuff. Like, I mean, you go back, what we know now about that compared to
uh-huh.
300 years ago, like, could there be another drastic change in our understanding of where we come from based on science? I mean, that could happen too. So when you say it's concrete, I
Yeah.
don't know, I guess I would challenge like, who knows what's concrete? Like, I don't know if,
Well, there's I mean, it would take a lot at this point to refute like the atom, right? And like how that works. It
yeah,
would take a lot to refute the fact that these atoms were born in stars, that they were created by stars that exploded. And here we are. At this point, we've got so much. But even if all that gets turned upside down tomorrow, that just feeds into the entire thing, in my view. It's just oh wow, like isn't this amazing that we just figured out this whole other thing,
yeah,
like it wouldn't change any of the fundamental stuff. Like I'm saying it in a kind of poetic way, and I find it beautiful in that way, but it's very much about just we are here experiencing this reality that can't be fake, right? Like the only thing that cannot be an illusion is the fact that we are here experiencing something, because if even
experiencing
if it
something.
were an illusion, like even if it were an illusion, then we're experiencing the illusion, which means we're experiencing something, which means we're right back at square one, right? So that's the thing. It's like Jesus is a great example, and structuring your life around his teachings and, maybe ignoring a couple of things that seem kind of wonky, whatever, you could do that. But you could do that with Superman. And then you can be like, I'm a Superman fan, but Batman's cool too. And Spider-Man's cool too. And I learn a ton from both of those. And you could just do the same thing across the board and never take anything on insufficient evidence, and your life would not be any less rich or fulfilled
And you believe that
or
at
any
scale.
of that.
You believe that at
Yeah.
scale. Like if everyone was
Yeah.
looking at
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
Marvel heroes as opposed to like more religious structure, that they would
Well,
be.
because that is what we're doing. We just think we're doing something different. But what we're really doing is just picking this one comic book and saying these are the better stories and these are real. And the other stuff is fun and cute and whatever, but this is the real one. It's just because we're doing that. That's the only difference, right? We're still taking stories that humans created and we're living by them and it's bettering our lives. If we just accept more stories, we would probably be better off because then we can go, oh man, we totally missed this bit. You know, like there's plenty of stuff from Buddhism and things that are not a part of Christianity that if we fused into it would make it better, right? Like mindfulness and things like that. Like prayer kind of gets at it a little bit,
Yeah.
but it's sort of unidirectional. It's kind of it's meant to be like, you know, you're pleading with the creator of the universe to intercede on your behalf, et cetera, et cetera. Meditation's not quite like that, right? But if we incorporated more of that stuff, maybe that would benefit us in a bunch of ways. But the rigid structure of no, this is my religion. Buddhism is not my thing. I don't do that. So you're missing out. You know, like that's what I mean is that it's better for our structures to be flexible. It's better for our stories to be all encompassing or for us to incorporate all the stories that we create. It's just better because the whole point is to learn how to flourish better, how to do a better job of flourishing. That's what the game is. The game is how can we improve conscious experience as much as we possibly can and avoid needless suffering as much as we possibly can. That's at the bottom of everything. That's where we're at. And so there are just better and worse ways to do that. And I feel like limiting our options makes no sense. Believing things that are there's no evidence for, that doesn't seem to help, right? Like there are better reasons to do all the things that we do than
Yeah.
because God said or whatever, you know?
I want to ask about creation just real quick, but I guess the difference I would have for I hear you, and
Mhm.
I'm learning a lot about why you think what you do, and I really appreciate it, Andrew. Truly,
Yeah.
like
No, and thank you for letting me yap because I know
no,
I'm
yeah,
talking a
but
lot.
that's how I'm learning. You know, I think
Mhm.
that's what that's why I wanted to do this. Big reason is
Mhm.
but I guess the difference that I would have for like other stories and the story of like, you know, the creator is it's the aiming up, it's the worship. It's something needs to come as top priority in your life. Something. So it could be
Mhm.
your kids, it could be your spouse, it could be your hobby, it could be something. It just gives you a structure to put something at the top of your importance hierarchy. And if you
Uh-huh.
put that as God, then it just it's like a way to kind of steer forward like when push comes to shove, you're going to do A or B. Which one is it? You kind of work your way down during difficult times. And I think
Uh-huh.
that you wouldn't want to put Superman at the top of your hierarchy for most important in your life. It's more of just like a moral guide. But the
Right.
idea of worship, I think, is because something will hold that position as the most important thing, the thing that you're willing to die for. So what are you going to
Uh-huh.
choose for that? And the idea of like a loving creator, if you follow the storyline of the Bible and what God has done for us to give us this, you know, gift of life that you should experience the
Mhm.
highs and lows and everything, like that seems like a good place to put the top of your hierarchy, I suppose.
So when you say like the most important thing in your life, what do you mean?
Yeah. Like choose A from B, you know, like what are you going to do? You know, do I choose having a beer or, you know, cleaning the house? I'm gonna choose cleaning the house. So I have cleaning the house or, you know, watching my kids baseball game. I go to the baseball game, like blah, blah. Like
Uh-huh.
what is the most important thing in your life? And I think that goes to meaning too. Like what is the most important thing in your life would be you place God as the most important thing. The creator of everything is the most important thing. Because if you don't consciously put something as the most important, then that might be able to
Mhm.
sway with a different situation in the wind and you could be led
So
astray.
okay, so that lets you put God at the top of that pyramid,
Yeah.
right? And you just said like, do I have the beer or do I clean the house? And then do I clean the house or go to my kid's baseball
Mhm.
game? And you're working your way up. Like, where's the point where you hit God? Like, where's
Um,
the point where you reach the decision making process where it's like, oh,
it's
do you
like
pick God or do you pick?
The Abraham story where he basically says, you know, you have to sacrifice your kid to do what I
Mm-hmm.
say. And then, you know, at the
Mm-hmm.
last minute, he doesn't have him do that. But then you know,
Yeah,
he
lucky
does it.
him.
Yeah. And then, well, then he does it himself. He's like, I am actually going to do this, you know,
Uh-huh.
to take on, the burden of the sin of the world type stuff. But like that
Yeah.
idea that when push comes to shove, it's like how people who, are Islamic terrorists can do horrifying things because God comes first. So there's a
Right.
flip side. Obviously, there's a negative to this. If your understanding of morality is skewed, but
Okay.
that's just where I would say what might be different than the other examples.
Right. Right. Well, yeah, you're right. Superman is a moral guide. Like it's not,
Yeah.
he's not the creator of the universe, right? Like we know he's fake. That's the whole point.
Yeah. Yeah.
But I think there are other abstract concepts that you can put there, right? So like I haven't thought about it in those terms, but for example, one thing that I feel very strongly and that I've argued with people about and that it challenges people, and I understand why, is, let's say your brother shows up at your door and says, dude, you got to help me bury a body. My brother, I would tell him, no, we're going to the cops right now. And they know that. My brothers know that. And they feel the same way. And I think that's kind of getting at what you're talking about, that um, there's a higher allegiance that I have. And it is to the moral code that I'm working with and working on, right? It's doing the best I can to maximize human flourishing, my flourishing and everyone else's, because they're all tied together, right? Like I'm not really flourishing if everyone else around me is suffering.
Yeah.
And vice versa. So to me, that's what I would put there is, do I have the beer or do I clean the house? Well, I clean the house. And the reason I clean the house is because if I don't, I'm going to be living in this filthy, horrible place, and that's going to
Yeah.
suck. And
Yeah.
it's going to suck for my wife, and it's going to suck for my kids when I have them, etc.
Yeah.
Right? Do I clean the house or do I go to the kids' game? Well, the kids' game is not going to be around all the time. He's not going to have games forever. I can clean the house when I get back, or I should make time and be responsible and clean the house at a time that makes sense where I don't have to make that decision anymore. Right? And then it goes all the way up to, do you help your brother hide a body and hide from the police, or do you turn him in? You turn him in because you have to maintain this moral code that is to the benefit of everyone, including you. And you wouldn't want to live in a world where if someone killed your brother, their brother is hiding them. You don't want to do that.
Wouldn't be at
So
the
that
benefit of your
means,
brother.
right.
Yeah.
So,
Or his
so,
kid, maybe.
well,
Given the
that's the
reason why
thing.
he killed the person, like when you say
Sure.
like the greater good, like is that for, for it's like the trolley problem, like is it to some degree, is it the stranger's greater good of like society, or do you place like I see
Mm,
this in education, Angel, because you'll stack the deck in the favor of your kids. You'll get them the best tutoring, the best schools, etc. But you
mhm.
know that you don't want kids who have had the deck stacked in their favor to rise up in positions in society, because then we don't have the best and brightest up there. So it's a
Right.
weird thing, because like the way you want to act as an individual and you
Mhm.
will act as an individual, is actually maybe not good for society. So do you put society first and say, you know what, instead of getting my kid a really good laptop, I'm going to get these kids in the hood a laptop.
Yeah. Yeah, it gets complicated, but I would say that I'm not uncomfortable with those things. So for example, stacking the deck for your kid, right? Like, well, my kid is my responsibility directly, right?
Yeah.
It's my job to make sure that they have the best life. So I'm going to do everything within the rules, right? I'm gonna help them study. I'm gonna prep them for the test. I'm gonna make sure they do well. I'm gonna do all that stuff because that's my responsibility. What
Full
I'm not
strings to
gonna
get him a
do
job
is
in Ukraine as
no,
as
see,
a consultant, like Hunter Biden. Yeah.
right, right. No.
Like,
So like
yeah,
what
that's
what
what
I'm
I
not going to do is things that are unethical and immoral, which would be actively preventing someone else from succeeding so that my kid can, right? I
Yeah.
wouldn't do that, right? I wouldn't get them the answers to the test. I wouldn't steal them from my teacher's laptop, right? I wouldn't do that. I would make them earn their thing because that's the whole point, right? Or like if I was if I took my kid to an emergency room, right? And someone was like, I can get you in front of the line. Don't worry about it. I'd be like, no, I don't want to live in that world where someone with connections gets to go ahead of my kid at
Right.
an emergency room. And we all kind of feel that. We feel the urge of like, yeah, take care of my kid now. But we also feel that's fundamentally unfair and we don't want to live in that world, which is why we have rules outside of ourselves that are enforced by people who don't have a stake in it at that moment, so that we can keep that because it's important, right?
Yeah.
So I wouldn't have trouble with that problem. And, again, if it's like, well, why did you kill the guy? All that kind of stuff. Well, if you have a good reason, then there's nothing to worry about. So the cops are, is still the option here. You know what I'm saying? So like, there's always something where it
Have you not
becomes
heard of
pretty
systemic
clear.
racism and policing, Angel? Come on. You know what you look like.
Either way, I mean, the systemic racism in policing will just be worse if you try to run. So either way, there's some scenario where you can work out, like, given the circumstances, this is the best thing we can do. And maybe it's not ideal, but it's the best thing we can do. So I just think the thing I would put up there instead of God is just the greater good, the most moral possible reality. And we may never attain it, but we're aiming for it, and that's the point.
Human
And I
flourishing, I
think,
like that phrase you use.
yeah, and
Um,
I think that does basically all the work. And I need not believe a single thing on insufficient evidence to do it. So it just
so
seems
when,
to work.
I guess the last thing I want to bring up, because again, like we could talk about this forever, but like when you talk about
Hmm.
insufficient evidence, Francis Collins, who I have my issues with when it comes to COVID, but he went into doing the Human Genome Project. He was the head of that, and he
Hmm.
went in as an atheist scientist, and he came out
Yeah.
as an evangelical Christian. And part of what he said was
Hmm.
essentially, I heard him or someone explain his work basically like you come downstairs one morning and alphabet cereal is all written out. It says like, "Good morning, Angel. Hope you have a wonderful day. I'm gonna come home at 5 o'clock. I'll see you later." And then you're just like, "Well, it's spilled that way." Like, and he kind of says like DNA is example that there is a code to our genetics, and
Yeah.
codes have coders. Or the idea C.S. Lewis talked about in Mere Christianity, like you don't might not know the architect of your building, but what we know about our understanding of reality, again, our like baby brains, okay, is that
Hmm.
things that exist were created. So do you believe in a creator, even if it's like the God of like just like created it and then stepped away, like no Holy Spirit type stuff, or is it back to where you said like I don't know, but does that hold any kind of incoherence for you of like the idea that things came from nothing, or do you think that it was
Yeah.
created because all we know about things that are created is that they are created by a creator?
Yeah. That's kind of, in my view, that's kind of, what's it called? Like, it's like human centrism. Like, because we see things this way, we see things as happening in a before and after kind of way. And we have a tendency, because we're story making machines, to attribute agency to anything that happens, right? So back in the day, we saw the sun go across the sky, so we just assumed there must be a god in a chariot pulling it across the sky, because it can't just go across the sky by itself, right? And now we know that it doesn't actually go across the sky. We're spinning and it's spinning, and there's all this other stuff that's going on that we don't even understand, right? So I feel like that's similar. And the story with Francis Collins is that he saw like salmon frozen in a waterfall, and that it was so breathtakingly beautiful that he just fell to his knees and realized that there must be a creator. I don't doubt that he had that moment, and I don't doubt his feelings there. And I met Francis Collins; he's a lovely guy. Um, but that's not any better than any other explanation you could have, or any other moment you could have. Like, wow, this is amazing. Isn't the universe amazing that all this random stuff just happens? That's an equally, probably more legitimate, because it doesn't presume knowledge that we don't have, right? But like, there's a kind of, it's a motivated reasoning, basically, is what I'm saying. Like, that's motivated reasoning. It's to say, just because something was created, just because something exists, it must have been created by something. Well, we think that because, yeah, if we see a building, we go, someone built that.
That's all we can go on is like our understanding of the world,
Yeah.
right?
All we can
Yeah.
go on is how that works for us. But the universe doesn't work that way. And the universe has no obligation to make sense to us. Right. So I say, I don't know. And you ask me, like, do I believe there's a creator being? I have no reason to believe there is one. And I don't spend much time thinking about it. And the complexity of human genes and all that kind of stuff, I agree. It's incredible, and it's
Yeah.
awe-inspiring.
Mathematics or something. Yeah.
It's beautiful, but natural selection seems to do a pretty good job of explaining how that can come about without an intelligent designer, you know? And as far as my understanding of it, I'm not an evolutionary biologist, but I have read up on it quite a lot. It makes a lot of sense. And there's tons of evidence for that being the case. So I go with that. And when it gets to the question mark at the end of like, yeah, but what created the first, self-replicating cell? I have no idea.
Yeah.
And I'm fine. I'm fine with that. There's just so much to be in awe of. There's so much to be in wonder about in the universe. And that feeling of awe, that feeling of like you said, worship, right? Like
Yeah.
that's what I get from it. Right? When you say worship, what I hear is awe, is this sense of awe, this sense of, there's something bigger than me that I'm submitting myself to in terms of like, I don't understand you, but it's incredible. And wow, aren't I lucky that I'm here?
Yeah.
That's what I get from the worship bit that you mentioned.
Okay.
And I can do that. I can do that right now. Like it's incredible that you and I are, 3,000 miles apart,
Yeah.
but we're having this conversation. That's
For sure.
amazing,
For
you know?
sure.
And there's an opportunity for awe and wonder in literally every moment that we are alive.
What a blessing that is. Like I try to do that with my kids,
Yeah.
like find the awe in everyday things. I mean,
Yeah.
that's the incredible thing, just like experiencing
It's
like how incredible life is and what a gift. I mean, that's the
exactly.
way I
Yeah.
see
Yeah.
it.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah. And it's just that, to button the insufficient evidence thing,
yeah.
like there just isn't any for a creator being. Right? We have stories, but we know where those stories came from. And there's tons of stories, and they don't all go together. They kind of mutually contradict each other a lot of times. So it's the more plausible hypothesis is that we have a tendency to create stories. We have a tendency to attribute agency to things that happen because we're stuck in this linear fourth dimension of, there's a past and there's a future, and we're in the present. And recognizing that is important because operating in the world on the best evidence you have is better for flourishing. So that's where I'm at. If God came down and was like, "Hey, I've revealed myself." Okay, the game has changed, right? But until then, I
Yeah.
can only do the best I can with what I've got,
It's
right?
interesting you say that because I've heard like Dawkins and Peter Boghossian say like even if that happened, they would go, no, it's a mass hallucination or something like that.
Well, that's also more likely, right? It's more likely that I've lost my mind. Like if I come down and the alphabet soup says, "Hi, Angel, good
Yeah.
morning," I would be like, well, the first thing I do is ask my wife, "Can you see this?" Right?
Yeah.
If she says no, then I know what happened. Right?
Okay.
If she
But
says yes, then it's like, all right, is there a carbon monoxide? Like, what's going on? You have to go with every more plausible explanation before you get to the giant, completely implausible explanation of like everything you know about the laws of the universe are completely upside down now. You know?
yeah, but it could like that's the thing is it could I'd look watch these UFO videos and like there's no heat trail and stuff. I'm like, I don't know anything. I was actually surprised though when I heard a lot of the big atheists say that like if God came down, it's like, yo, I'm real, just FYI. All right, peace, back to the clouds. That they wouldn't that wouldn't change their mind. That does fall to me. It sounds a little bit more like what we do kind of in our world of like critical thinking stuff of like, if there's a hypothetical thing that could get you to change your mind.
Mm-hmm.
That's like that classic one that Boghossian talks about in his book is like, is what hypothetical evidence could I show you that could get you to change your mind? If they say like, to get you to like Trump when you hate Trump, it's like nothing. There's zero that you could ever give me to change my mind. It's like, well,
Yeah,
isn't
yeah.
that a faith argument then? There's nothing that you could change that would change your mind. Then
Mm-hmm.
it's not it's like the Sam Harris thing of like, if they didn't arrive on it based on logic and reasoning, there's no logic or reason that could get you out of it. I was,
Well, Sam Harris actually doesn't agree with that. Actually, because he has seen people be reasoned out of beliefs that they didn't reason their way into. So he actually refutes that. But I'm sure that
oh, does
Boghossian
he
and
publicly
Dawkins,
refute that now?
yeah, yeah. Well,
Oh, okay.
I don't know if he was ever with that argument, but yeah, I've heard him say like, no, because I've gotten emails from people who watched a video of mine and they changed their beliefs based on my arguments, even though their beliefs were basically things that they were brought up with that they never really reasoned themselves into, stuff like that. So, but I'm sure that Dawkins and Boghossian and all these people, it's not that they would never believe it. It's just that their first thought wouldn't be, well, God must be real.
Mhm.
their first thought is probably like, have I lost my mind? Like,
Yeah.
am I hallucinating? Is because there are more plausible explanations for what's going on in that moment than that God just happened, the creator of the universe just happened to have revealed himself to you right now, you know? So that's what I mean is there would just be more questions.
Yeah.
But I'm sure that there's a some limit where they would feel sufficiently satisfied that every other question has been answered and that look, everyone else can see this guy and there's some measurable impact and all the kind of questions that they would have would be answered, which a godlike thing would easily just ace all of those tests,
Yeah.
that then they would say, okay, so yeah, clearly this is something that we now have to grapple with. Like this is another part of our knowledge now. So yeah, I just think it would just take a while, right? Like,
For sure. Yeah, just based on
yeah,
our understanding of what is true based on like, the scientific
right.
method and stuff like that. It makes sense that especially science-brained people would defer to that based on what we know about the world. I guess I just feel like sometimes I don't know anything about the world. And not just because I'm not a scientist, just like I just think that we human beings probably just know nothing. I take my phone, I go back 30 years and I show it to them. It's witchcraft, among the
For
top
sure.
scientists and stuff like that.
Oh
So
yeah,
who
absolutely.
knows
Yeah,
what's happening,
absolutely.
you know?
But the fact that it's a phone and that it's a phone and that that even if you can't explain it, there is someone who can.
Yeah,
That shows that like even though the person 40, 50 years before us would think this is a piece of magic, it's not magic.
I do now.
It's
Yeah.
you yeah, you just know that they don't know how it works,
Yeah. In 100
right?
years, I
So
wonder if they're going to look back and there's going to be stuff that even the top brains today would just not be able to comprehend,
I
without,
hope so.
yeah.
I hope so. That'd
Yeah.
be awesome.
Do you look at like people like Frank Turek or William Lane Craig or Stephen C. Meyer, people like that? Are you kind of gone through that or do you still, because I still love, that's why I want to have a conversation with you, Angel. Is like, I still look for like the best steel man, star man, the best people who have these different perspectives and try and watch these debates and watch these conversations. Like, because I'm
Hmm.
always trying to understand why people think what they think. Are you familiar
Yeah.
with all those people and kind of consume their stuff?
Uh, I'm only familiar with William Lane Craig of the people you just mentioned, but yeah, I've watched a ton of those videos and I've looked at all the arguments and I
Doesn't
find them generally unconvincing because I can kind of see that they're more rhetorical trick than any kind of argument that refutes anything. Most of the time that's what it is. Or there's it's an argument that presumes something that I don't presume, and so therefore it doesn't work because you have to
Yeah.
prove that presumption first. So they kind of they speed past that presumption and use it as a baseline. There's a bunch of that. But yeah, all the time people say people come up to me and they say, I have indisputable proof that God exists. And I still get a little bit excited. I'm like, oh, okay, what is it? Let's see it, you know?
I don't
And
think
so
that.
far,
Yeah, I think that's
you
by
know,
design. I think that if
yeah.
there's, I think that just in closing, I think that if there was indisputable truth, if God did do that, say like, look, here's proof that I think we would become automatons. I think that we don't have free will then. I think that we would like then you
That's
have to
funny.
obey because if he comes down and says like, look, if you don't do this, you're going to
Yeah.
hell and it's just like fire and razor blades for eternity, then we become robots. And I think that the way that I see
Hmm.
it is like he wants us to be able to make the choices because that's what true
Right.
love is. Love is going to be something that you can choose to leave, you can choose to go. Our wives can leave us, and like you want them to
Hmm.
be able to leave us because then they're choosing to be with us. And I think that that's why the
Hmm.
world is structured in such a way that there will ever never be like irrefutable evidence because then there would never be
Yeah.
the free will to make that choice.
But is there really a choice though? Because it's kind of at the point of a gun, and that gun is called an eternity in hell. Like, is that
But you
really a
don't know for
choice?
sure if the gun exists.
Well, you have to, if you buy into the premise to start with, then you
You
do, right?
have faith that the gun exists. But I'm
You
saying if the
still.
gun really existed, then people
Okay.
wouldn't have that choice. But so I like personally, I'll say like,
Okay.
I believe that there's a gun that I can't see, so I'm gonna follow this way. Let's say, okay,
Right.
where
But that's still a gun, right? That's still effectively a gun,
yeah, because
right?
but I'm
And
making the
so,
conscious choice to believe in the gun as opposed to seeing it, touching it, holding the weight of it.
right. But that's still effectively a gun. and it is still creating a dynamic where you know what's going to happen if you don't do X, Y, Z,
Hmm.
right? So
Yeah, but without
it's
evidence.
not much of a, yeah, but it's still not much of a choice. Like you're still deciding, this is the dynamic I'm in. There's a gun. Let's say it's like it's, that thing where the guy has the gun in his pocket and he's not showing you the gun, and it could
Yeah.
just be this or it could be a gun.
Right.
But what are you going to do in that circumstance? I'm not going to mess around and take the chance on whether or not this guy has a gun. I'm just going to give him my wallet, right? It's
Yeah,
kind
that's
of
what
like
I'm
that.
doing. Yeah.
It's kind of like
Yeah.
that though. And it's like, is that really a choice though? That guy still kind of held you at gunpoint. Even if he walks away and goes, ha 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 ha, and runs off, he still held you at gunpoint because your understanding was, these are my choices here. And this choice I do not want because it's going to be horrible. Right? So you're stuck. And that's the situation with God. It's like, I want you to choose to love me. But if you don't, that's
Yeah.
kind of like, that's one of the
Like I
things that
want you,
bothered
yeah, I
me.
want you to choose to buy into what what I'm instructing you to do. I guess that's what I'm
Mhm.
saying. That's the choice though. Like the choice,
But or else, the or else is always there,
yeah, if you don't live according to the way that you're supposed to live, there will be consequences.
which is the way that I want you to live. And so you
Yeah.
must listen to me or else. That's kind of that's what it is.
Yeah. Yeah. But
That's
then
the thing that
you
really
make that
bugged me. It's
choice,
like,
right? Like
that's
my
not a
kids make that
choice.
choice. If I say like, go to bed or else you don't get whatever dessert
Hmm.
tomorrow. Like they then they have the choice on whether or not to do that. So it's like, do you want something unpleasant or not? But you can say like, I don't believe
Yeah.
dessert exists, but
Well, that in that scenario, it's very clear that it does, right?
it
And the
does.
consequences are very clear and immediate.
Yeah.
But the thing is that that's what it is. It's a kind of behavior at gunpoint scenario. Like you're never sure if the gun exists, but the thing is that just the fear that the gun may exist is enough for you to behave.
Yeah.
So it's not really a choice. It's not a
Yes.
choice because you know which choice is better for you and which one will be terrible. And basically, you're not going to roll the dice on whether or not that consequence actually exists. You're just going to do the thing just in case because you're terrified of that consequence, which means that you don't really have much of a choice. It seems like you do because no one is shoving you into the decision that you're making, but you're making the decision out of a fear of the consequence, which may or may not exist, but you're not gonna gamble on. You know what I mean? So you are trapped in that way. But that's one of the things that bugged me. I'm like, that's not a choice. Like it's the stakes couldn't be higher. It's like eternity of hell.
Yeah.
Do what I say or eternity of hell. Like that's
Once you make the choice to buy into it, you mean. I guess that's where I'm missing you. Once you make the choice to
Mhm.
buy into it, then you have these as a consequences. But you have the initial choice to believe that God has this structure, that there are consequences for your actions in this in the
Sure. Sure, but even then, even it's like, so I'm screwing up royally right now, right? If it turns out that I made the wrong decision about whether or not to believe it, because it
yeah,
turns out that it's real, right?
yeah,
Now I've screwed up, and now if I die, if I get hit by a bus, that's it for me, and it's the eternity of torment because it turned out to be true, and you should have believed me. You know what I mean? Like
yeah,
it's there, and it's like that's not fair, dude. I used the reasoning you gave me to come to this conclusion. And now you're punishing me for the thing you made me. Like you made me be this guy. And now you're punishing me for being the guy you made me to be,
yeah.
you know?
Yeah,
So
that's
it's
that's
like,
interesting take. And like the same, same people have used logical reasoning to arrive at other conclusions. So like what in you, in the way that you were made, got
mhm,
you to make these decisions compared to someone else? Yeah,
I don't know, but
yeah,
I'm doing the best I can with what I've got. And the presumption is whatever I've got, he gave me, right?
yeah,
So when I meet my maker, I'll be like, listen, dude, I did the best I could with what you gave me. I honestly, sincerely got to this conclusion based on everything that I understood about how the world worked.
yeah,
So, and then he'll be like, well, too bad. You screwed up. You should have thought better. Like what does that mean? Like you made me, you programmed me this way. So it's a trap no matter what. That's the thing that always bugged me. It's like, it seems like I really am stuck. And I actually don't believe that free will is real. So that's another conversation. But
that is that's a
but
whole other
but
conversation.
like that's a trap. That's a total trap. There's no way out of it because I choose not to believe any of that stuff. Or not really, I choose not to believe it. It's just I don't believe it because I'm not convinced, right? But if it turns out to be true, then whose fault is it that I didn't believe it? If I'm only using the brain I was given and the reasoning that my brain created because it was programmed a certain way, and the environment that I was in that taught me to do things a certain way, all of it is created by the creator, no? So I was basically put into this playpen that was pretty much designed to make me who I am and think how I do, which led me to this conclusion, which means it was inevitable. And now the punishment that I'm going to get for my inevitable conclusion, it's like, it's not fair because I had no choice but to think the way I thought. You know,
That's interesting. Yeah.
I'm stuck. I'm stuck. I'm being as sincere as I possibly can be in my beliefs and in my behaviors right
No,
now.
I believe that about you.
And
That's why I love this conversation with you. I guess
yeah,
my take on that would just be like the elements in the Bible, just like surrender of just like, I think that's part of it is
but
like,
but you have to want to surrender, right? Like you have to feel that feeling of, oh yeah, this is it. I'm going to let go now because
yeah,
I've
and you
been
have to do that
convinced.
kind of blind.
But you have
Yeah.
to be convinced to move into that blind movement, right? You have to
Yeah.
reach that point. Like you can't believe something because you want to, right? You have to believe it. It has to actually hit you and
Yeah.
feel like, man, this is the thing. And if you don't get that and you pretend, that's also bad. So what happens if you're just unconvinced? And then it turns out, I was like,
Right.
well, you should have been convinced. How was I
Yeah.
supposed to have been convinced? Well, with the
It's,
brain I gave you. But the brain you gave me made me not convinced.
That's
It just,
that's a really good point. You know, I think about like there's no atheist in a foxhole, or like the scripture about how it's easier for a camel to go through the eye of a needle than a rich man to enter the kingdom of
Mhm.
heaven. I always used to think like that was vilifying rich people. And then what I thought of like maybe that's part of that is like, you know, people who are comfortable like have trouble doing it, you know, or like
Mhm.
maybe, you know, sometimes like the first time I admitted that I was a Christian was when I was in the ICU. I had a stroke in 2018. And
Mhm.
I was like, they weren't sure. It was like a 50-50. They're like, do you have a religious preference? I was like, kind of like hedge my bets a little bit. You know what I mean? Um, so
Pascal's wager.
I know, I think so.
Yeah.
Dude, this was long. Sorry to take up such a big chunk of your day, but
No,
this was
no, this is
awesome.
so much fun. Yeah.
Yeah, man. No, like I said, you know, I think just privately, like I deeply respect you. And I think that the way your brain works is really great. Gives me things to think about. I think that I would never want my kids or myself or anyone that I love and, you know, who I do, you know, see so many benefits to the faith that I found, but like, I don't want them to arrive there blindly. I don't like the idea you can't ask questions. I don't like any of
Yeah.
that. So I'm hoping that at the very least, you know, people who are like hardcore, just like, no, like Angel's wrong, but everything. It's like, all right, well then wrestle with his ideas then. You know what I mean? Like
Yeah. Yeah.
that's what's so good. I think that's what's so valuable about it. So really
Yeah, man.
appreciate you. Is there anything you want to talk about or plug?
No, I just say thank you very much, man. I've been looking forward to talking about this
Yeah,
stuff.
me
As you can
too.
tell, I get very like this is so much
Yeah,
fun because I love getting into this. It's so crazy and wild to think about, and I appreciate your openness to it.
for sure.
I hope I didn't talk too much. And
It's all right.
starmanning.com. That's the new
Starmanning.com. Yeah,
thing.
very cool.
The
Like
new thing I've got.
addition to Steel Manning, where it's not just about the argument, but about like seeing the best in the person, not just the best in the argument. It's
Yeah,
really, really cool stuff, man.
indeed.
All right.
Yeah.
Angel Eduardo,
Well, thank
thank
you,
you.
man.
Appreciate you,
Yeah,
brother.
thank you.
All
All
right.
right.
Bye bye.